So I don't have much for you today, but without further ado, let's get right back into the news. First of all, it looks like Apple is going to try to bring the iPad much more closer to a laptop replacement than we first actually thought. You guys may remember last year was the first time iOS on iPad really got an overhaul. It wasn't like they totally changed iOS and totally threw out iOS on iPads. It's just that the iPads that you once knew did get a pretty big overhaul with a brand new operating system called iPadOS. And iPadOS pretty much added all these features to kind of bridge the gap between a regular OS and a mobile OS. Like for instance, we did get things like better support for drives if you wanted to like connect stuff to your iPad, whether it be like flash drives, SD card, pretty much any mass storage device did play nicer with iPads. And then on top of that, they did actually add mouse support to iPadOS. Sure, it wasn't the same thing as a regular mouse on like a laptop or a desktop, but just the fact they added that, you can see Apple is really trying to push the iPad line closer to like a regular desktop OS or more closer to a laptop. And it looks like they're actually trying to continue that trend with the brand new iPads that are supposedly coming out this year. Without a doubt, I think they're going to be adding a brand new iPad Pro. But here's essentially what Apple is trying to do with the next iteration of the iPad and with the smart keyboard. Of course, you guys know Apple does currently sell a smart keyboard for all of their devices, and it does work fairly nicely. It does have a keyboard on it that pretty much folds up and it turns into like a smart cover for your iPad. I've actually had one of those, but that was around the time where I think they didn't have that smart keyboard, or maybe they did, but I never could use it because I had an iPad mini. But either way, they are trying to bring the iPad much more closer to like a laptop or a regular desktop OS, because rumors have it now, you can read the title of this article, it does say that Apple is trying to put a trackpad on the next smart keyboard. And that's actually very interesting, because I know there's so many people out there that are actually going to have very conflicting thoughts of this whole process. On one hand, it's nice that the iPad is trying to become closer to like a laptop replacement, because a lot of people just don't see the value of an iPad because it's still pretty much the same as like an iPhone if you think about it, because it still runs kind of the same OS. The software is not really enhanced all that much, especially if you need to get real work done, of course, depending on what you need to do. So yeah, I can see why some people don't like iPad the way it is, and they actually want iPad to move a little bit more closer to something like a laptop replacement or a desktop replacement, more closer to a regular OS. But I think that's why we have things like regular desktop computers or laptops. If you want a regular OS, you can go out and get something like a MacBook, or you can get a Windows laptop and things like that. So those things already exist, but Apple really does see the future of the iPad as actually being a laptop-y type device. And this rumor could be real, that they could be adding a trackpad to the actual smart keyboard or the smart cover case coming to iPads. And I wouldn't doubt Apple for doing this, since like I said, their envision of the actual iPad is to be something closer to something like a MacBook and things like that. They're kind of in competing with the same realm as like the Surface devices, of course, the Surface Pro and the Surface Go and all of that stuff. So I can see why Apple would want to do that. But on another hand, I can see this actually being super just silly, because what's the point of actually adding a trackpad to this when there's not much you can actually do with the OS? I guess if they did add something like a trackpad to like the next iteration of the smart keyboard or the smart cover, I guess what they're probably going to do is, alongside that, keep pushing these updates out to iPad OS to actually make it feel more like a actual real OS instead of more closer to a mobile OS if they actually added that. Of course, it would look kind of silly on something like your iPad, but I guess we would all get used to it, and it would just be something very interesting that Apple would want to do for it. And I can see them actually doing this. So if you're thinking about the future of the iPad, it really does look like all the time more updates come out and more stuff come out for the iPad, that they're really trying to push for it to be more closer to a laptop replacement or a laptop OS or desktop OS, but also I don't know why they would want to do this. Just thinking about this, just because on one hand it is kind of cool. A lot of people don't care about the iPad, and they don't look at the iPad the same way they did, like for instance 10 years ago. Since the iPad's been on the market a little over 10 years now, I can see why so many people just do not care, and the sales of this thing must be dwindling down. There must not be as much people excited for this since it's not a new product. iPad's been around for 10 years, and how do you try to entice people to get on to the iPad line of devices, especially if they don't care about them or don't look at them the same way they did before, and especially since in general they're still pretty much the same experience in a lot of ways you would get on like an iPhone. What's the point? Well, by trying to make it more closer to a laptop replacement or a desktop OS, so I can see that actually being a thing from Apple. And honestly, it's just very interesting to me that Apple of all companies is trying to push this towards a laptop replacement, but in reality they already have a laptop line. The laptop line for Apple, of course, is their MacBooks. They have MacBook Airs, they have MacBooks, they have MacBook Pros. So what's really the incentive by trying to make this closer to a laptop replacement when they already have the laptops in the mix? But either way, it's still very interesting to see the direction that Apple really wants the iPad to actually go. Do they want it to be still more of a bigger mobilely OS type of device where you do a lot of tasks you would do on your smartphone, or do they want to try to make it much more of a regular desktop OS where you do other tasks on it, and it makes it feel like it's made primarily more for work environments, and you can do all these normal tasks you would do on something like a regular desktop OS and a laptop and things like that. But it's just interesting to me that Apple is trying to change the direction of this, and a new rumor came out that a trackpad could be headed to the iPad. Now, the next story here is actually about a game. It's actually about Crossy Roads. You probably heard of Crossy Roads, whether you played mobile games or not played mobile games, but it's very interesting that there is a sequel to Crossy Roads right now. The unfortunate thing is, yes, because there is an unfortunate thing about this. Let me go ahead and sip my water since I'm actually kind of dry right now. But yes, the unfortunate thing about Crossy Roads is the fact that it is coming to mobile, but there is a catch. It's only going to be coming to Apple Arcade. So unfortunately, unless you're on an Apple device and you pay for Apple Arcade, which I think is only $4.99 a month, so it's not the most expensive thing in the world, but it's also not free, then you won't have access to this brand new Crossy Road game. And here is the brand new Crossy Road game right here. You can see right here. It does look entirely different than the regular Crossy Roads. You guys may remember Crossy Roads. It came out a long time ago, and basically what Crossy Roads was pretty much a different version of Frogger if you ever played traditional Frogger. And this one looks nothing like traditional Frogger. And you can see on screen right here from this little like image that's going around, this GIF or GIF, however you want to pronounce it. Basically, it looks like it's going to be a cooperative multiplayer game as well, because you can see there's player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4, and it looks like you're kind of like, in a way, it's like kind of like a speed running game, I want to say. You can see they're jumping on platforms here. They are collecting coins, so that's going to be very interesting because, of course, with Apple Arcade, no Apple Arcade game, since you're paying that $4.99 premium price, you're not going to have things like microtransactions and in-game purchases to it. So most likely these are going to be things to like give you like little costumes, give you different characters. That's pretty much how it was in the original Crossy Roads, if you ever played the original Crossy Road game. But yeah, overall, it looks like an okay game, but I really wanted to talk about this, not specifically more about Crossy Roads. I really wanted to talk about the future of Apple Arcade because I think this is a smart move from Apple, especially since I'm pretty sure a lot of people heard of Crossy Road. I've even heard of Crossy Road. I used to play Crossy Road back in the day. I actually thought it was a pretty relaxing game, and those are the type of games you actually want on mobile. I know some people like those games on mobile that are more closer to like a console quality game or a PC quality game, but just the fact that Apple is trying to make the right move, in my opinion, by adding this game to Apple Arcade, I think that Apple Arcade is in a really good spot to where right now, if you look at the list of Apple Arcade games, which I'm not going to go over the Apple Arcade games list right now. It would honestly take way too long, but I think that for what you're getting for Apple Arcade, I think it is a steal at $4.99, especially if you play a lot of mobile games. And the nice thing about Apple Arcade, on top of you getting all these games that are actually pretty good quality, especially if you don't want to dig around like a storefront, like for instance the Apple App Store and things like that. You guys know it can be quite overwhelming trying to find games that are actually good and don't have a lot of in-game purchases, don't have a lot of microtransactions, don't have a currency where you have to wait a certain time to play the game. You don't have to try to find the good games. This is overall just a very good service. And honestly, I have tried it in the past, and what I can say about Apple Arcade is it's definitely worth $14.99. You got a mixture of little simple games on Apple Arcade that you can invest almost no time into, or you actually got console quality-esque indie games on there that can consume a lot of time and you can get really invested in. And the nice thing about Apple Arcade, to top off everything I just mentioned, is the fact that, of course, on Apple Arcade you are actually going to be able to use a controller as well. So if you have like a PS4 controller or an Xbox One controller laying around, you can use that on Apple Arcade. And overall, I just think it's a very very great service. And it is nice that a bigger mobile game is coming to Apple Arcade with Crossy Road. It's going to be called, of course, right here from the title of this article, it does say Crossy Road Castle, and I think that's actually a pretty good name for it. Let's go ahead and actually check out some gameplay here, since there is actually gameplay to be had right here of Crossy Road Castle. Here is Crossy Road Castle, and yeah, it's pretty much, you know what this game actually reminds me of? This game actually reminds me of Celeste in a lot of ways. It looks like it's a game where you have to try to like maneuver on platforms and not get hit and not die. So yeah, it's a platformer slash maybe a racing game where you're trying to maybe race your games, race your games. That's so funny, but race your friends and things like that with this game. It looks like it's, of course, it's made by the same developer as the original Crossy Road, and it's actually very interesting as well. This company who made this game actually made another game. I do believe it was like kind of like a car game where you drove a car. I think I played it before. You drive a car around, and basically the premise of that game was to actually try to outrun the cops. And I thought that game was very fun. But yeah, Crossy Road Castle is coming out to Apple Arcade. It is kind of a shame that it is going to be exclusive to Apple Arcade when this thing actually drops. But of course, it does make sense. They're trying to make a little bit more extra money. Apple wants to try to find developers that'll make it enticing for people to actually join Apple Arcade, and I think this is a game that a lot of people just recognize, and a lot of people know when you hear Crossy Road, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that game, and I may want to check out the sequel to that game. And this game, like I said, is perfect for something like the Apple Arcade service. Now, the next one on my list is actually a kind of an old article from maybe like a week ago, but I actually never covered this on my channel here because I actually forgot to talk about this when I was thinking about other stuff. So basically, it looks like Microsoft has confirmed for the Xbox Series X, which this news is still going to be relevant since, of course, the Xbox Series X hasn't came out yet. Plus, I haven't actually talked about my feelings and my thoughts about this. But yes, it is confirmed as we speak right now that Microsoft is going to be allowing the Xbox Series X to be backwards compatible with the Xbox One. But alongside the Xbox One, they already confirmed that they're going to do backwards compatibility with every Xbox ever made, and I think that's actually a very good direction for the Xbox Series X. So you're going to be getting compatibility with Xbox One games, Xbox 360 games, and then the original Xbox from 2001. It's funny, as we speak right now, you can't call the original Xbox the Xbox One like a lot of people would normally call like the PS1 the Xbox One, because we already have an Xbox called the Xbox One line. So if you called the original Xbox the Xbox One, it just flat out wouldn't make sense. But the Xbox from 2001. So basically, you can play every Xbox game ever made in one single box, and I actually think that's the right way to do it. Now, I don't know if every single game is going to be compatible, of course. They're probably maybe going to have to roll them out in updates, just like they did with the Xbox One line of consoles, maybe. And if they don't do that, I know for a fact, or most likely, not every single game is going to be backwards compatibility. Usually what happens is with some of these systems, some games are just incompatible because the way the code was written, or it's just too hard to want to write them for the next system. So I don't know if it's going to be 100% compatibility, because that would actually be super insane if they had 100% compatibility with every Xbox game ever made. But just the fact that they can work with older generations of hardware is very good, and I think this is a good move in the right direction for Microsoft. And it does make sense, because time and time again, it's already proven by so many people out there that even though some people may not use backwards compatibility, it does show that people are generally interested and excited when they hear the thoughts of backwards compatibility. Now, when it comes to me and backwards compatibility, I'm very iffy on backwards compatibility. Sometimes I like backwards compatibility and sometimes I don't. It just depends on if I'm going to use it or not, and it depends on the system and what type of games the last system actually had for backwards compatibility. But I think it's a good move on their part to actually add this to the next system, and the reason I think it's actually a very good move to actually add it to the next system is just because, well, when you get your Xbox Series X, you guys know for like the first 2 or 3 years of a console coming out, there's not a lot of games coming out, and sometimes those games that actually roll out to that system are games that you may not generally be interested in, and a lot of those games are going to be cross-platform games. So for instance, when the Xbox Series X comes out, it's a nice system, but a lot of those games, of course, already confirmed aren't going to be exclusive to that system. So if you already own an Xbox One, you won't be getting any brand new games for that system. There'll still be Xbox One games, if that makes sense, or there'll be games that are going to be going between both generations of games. So that is nice that you will be able to play different games, whether it's Xbox One games, whether it's exclusive games on that system, whether it's just all these different games from all these different Xboxes. That is good, and that will help people justify the price of these systems, especially with a lot of these rumors coming out. You guys know a lot of these systems nowadays with 4K and with how GPUs and CPUs are going to cost, most likely these systems might be upwards of $500. Who knows how crazy it could get this gen, since we don't actually know the full retail price of some of these systems. It can even get upwards of like $600 tops if they really wanted to. So they want to make sure they can justify the price, and it's also good for the consumer to have one box that pretty much plays all your games. You can't really disagree with that, because it is nice to have one box you just plug in and you have all of the previous generations of that platform at your hands. That means you don't have to have like a Xbox One hooked up, an Xbox 360 hooked up, an Xbox original hooked up if you want to play all of those different games. So overall, I really do think this is a smart move. And then to top off everything, of course, just like the Xbox One X, you guys know the Xbox One X is the best Xbox One you can currently buy on the market. And the nice thing about that console is it allows you to play games from like the Xbox 360 days in better resolution and better frame rate. They pretty much got a big boost, big enhancements thanks to the Xbox One X's power, and that's most likely what the trend is actually going to be when it actually comes to the Xbox Series X. They're going to allow you to play games in upscaled resolution and also a better frame rate. Is it going to be every game? No, it'll probably depend on different developers. It'll probably depend if Microsoft's willing to work with them. Just all these different scenarios, and some games probably won't make sense for like an upscaled version. It's better off to do like a remaster or an updated port of that game to next generation hardware. But overall, this is just some very good news that Microsoft already confirms it will be supporting all the generations. Just don't get your hopes up. It probably won't be every single game, and if it is every single game, of course, it might be in updates just like the Xbox One, because the problem is with the Xbox One, I think it actually ran on different code than the Xbox 360, and the problem is they just couldn't make every game play natively on the Xbox One. So basically what happened is with the Xbox One, they had to roll out games each and every month or every once in a while that were 360 games onto the Xbox One, because the coding was different, and it was basically emulation. They had to emulate all the code, and it was very time consuming. You can see why every game still is not backwards compatible with the Xbox 360. They have to like update them as they roll out, and they have to choose and pick. And of course, not every game is going to make sense to actually code their game to work on the Xbox One, just because it may not be a popular game. It may be a game that nobody cared about, nobody played, the sales were bad, or maybe it's just an obscure, a very a very unknown game, basically, so that's probably why not every game will work. But overall, this is just some very good news, and that just adds one more feature you're going to have when you get your brand new Xbox Series X Xbox next year or this year, excuse me, in 2020. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this episode. Anyway, this is Wayne.